I lost consciousness after the crash. My son left me alone in the hospital and vanished. 5 days later, he stormed up to the nurse and snapped, "Is that old fool still here?" Her calm reply hit him harder than the truck that smashed my car. He froze, went white as a ghost, and dropped his phone. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Amos Carter. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent most of my life in Phoenix, Arizona. 42 years as a fire inspector for the state, checking buildings, making sure people stayed safe, doing the right thing. I always believed that if you lived honestly and treated people fairly, they'd do the same for you, especially family. Turns out I was spectacularly wrong about that. My son Dennis is 38. He wasn't always the person he is now. I remember when he was 7, running down the driveway when I'd come home from inspections, his face lighting up like I was some kind of hero. Those days feel like they happened to someone else entirely. The change started 3 years ago when he married Tiffany Simpson, a woman whose Instagram following apparently matters more than human decency. She's got 30,000 followers who watch her post pictures of overpriced brunches and designer handbags. What they don't see is how she looks at me when the camera's off, like I'm a piece of worn-out furniture cluttering up her future mansion. Dennis transformed after marrying her. The kid who used to help me restore old fire badges became a man who checks his phone during conversations and sighs when I talk. He works as a regional sales manager at Southwest Industrial Solutions, pulls in $78,000 a year, and somehow that's never enough. He's borrowed money from me 17 times in the past 3 years, always for business opportunities that never materialize. The total sits at $85,000. I kept every promissory note he signed, though I never imagined I'd actually need them. 3 months ago, Tiffany started dropping hints about my house. "This property is worth so much, Dad," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It's such a shame it's just sitting here with you rattling around in it alone. Have you thought about what'll happen to it? You know, eventually." Eventually, like I'm milk approaching its expiration date. The morning of March 12th started ordinary. I was driving my Ford F-150 through the intersection at East Indian School Road and 24th Street, heading to meet an old colleague for coffee. The light was green. I saw the other truck coming from my left, a blur of silver moving way too fast. I didn't even have time to brace before impact. The crash sounded like the world ending, metal screaming against metal, glass exploding into diamonds of light. My truck spun, my head cracked against something hard, and then there was nothing but white noise and copper-tasting blood in my mouth. When I came to, there were sirens and voices and someone cutting my seatbelt. A paramedic's face swam into focus above me. "Sir, can you hear me? You're going to be okay. We're taking you to Phoenix Memorial." The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. A doctor with tired eyes told me I had a fractured hip, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, as if that was supposed to make the pain radiating through my entire body feel better. They admitted me immediately, wheeled me to a semi-private room on the 4th floor. Dennis showed up about 2 hours later. I heard him before I saw him, his voice in the hallway, loud and irritated. "Yeah, I'm here at the hospital. No, I don't know how long this is going to take. We had dinner reservations at that new place in Scottsdale, remember?" He walked into my room, still holding his phone, barely glancing at me lying there with an IV in my arm and monitors beeping around me. He looked annoyed, not worried, not scared, just inconvenienced, like I'd gotten into an accident specifically to ruin his evening. "Hey, Dad," he said, his eyes already drifting to the TV mounted on the wall. "So you're okay, right? The nurse said you're stable." I tried to speak, but my mouth was so dry the words came out as a croak. "Water—" Dennis looked around vaguely, spotted the pitcher on the side table, but made no move to pour me any. Instead, he answered his phone again. "Yeah, babe, I'm here now. He's fine. Looks pretty beat up, but you know these old guys. They're tougher than they look." I watched him pace near the window, his back to me, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a whisper. "The doctor said he'll be here for a few days at least." I know. It's going to cost a fortune." "No, I don't think he has supplemental insurance." Yeah, just another bill we'll have to deal with. The words hit harder than the collision had. Another bill we'll have to deal with. Like I was already dead, and he was tallying up the inheritance minus the inconvenient expenses. He stayed maybe 20 minutes total. Checked his watch 4 times. Told me he'd try to stop by tomorrow, in a tone that made it clear he absolutely would not. Then he was gone, his expensive shoes clicking down the hallway, leaving me alone with the machines and the pain and the sudden crushing realization that my son, my only child, saw me as nothing more than a financial inconvenience, waiting to become a financial windfall. The nurse who came in to check my vitals found me staring at the ceiling, tears running down into my ears. She was a black woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Her name tag read, Barbara Richards, RN. The pain getting worse? She asked gently, adjusting my IV. Different kind of pain, I managed to say. She glanced toward the door where Dennis had left, and something in her expression told me she'd heard at least part of his phone conversation. She patted my hand. Get some rest, Mr. Carter. You've been through a lot today. That night, as Phoenix's lights glittered through my window and pain meds dulled the worst of the physical hurt, I lay awake thinking about the wreckage of my life. Not the twisted metal of my truck, that could be replaced. The wreckage of everything I thought I'd built. A family. A legacy. A son who would care when his father nearly died. I'd raised Dennis alone after his mother left when he was 12. Worked double shifts. Missed promotions because I wanted to be at his baseball games and school plays. Put him through college without loans. Gave him everything I had. And now, lying here broken and alone, I understood with perfect clarity that he was just waiting for me to die so he could cash out. The pain meds started pulling me under, but one thought crystallized in my mind before sleep took me. If he doesn't value me alive, he sure as hell won't profit from me dead. The morning after the crash, I woke to an empty room. No flowers, no cards, no concerned family members. Just Barbara checking my vitals again, her face carefully neutral when she saw I was alone. Has anyone called asking about me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not yet, Mr. Carter, she said softly, but it's still early. It wasn't early. It was nearly 10 in the morning. Dennis was probably at his office by now. Probably hadn't thought about his father once since leaving the hospital. The day crawled by. Other patients in the ward had visitors. Children, spouses, friends. My roommate across the curtain had so many people crowding around his bed that the nurses had to enforce the visitation limit. I pretended to sleep so no one would see the humiliation on my face. That night, I started remembering. Not the recent painful memories, but older ones, better ones. I remembered Dennis at 6 years old, sitting on my lap while I showed him my collection of vintage fire inspection badges, his small fingers tracing the raised metal, his voice full of wonder. Daddy, you save people? I help keep them safe, buddy, I told him. You're the bravest person ever, he'd said, hugging me tight. What happened to that kid? Where did I lose him? The second day brought more silence. No calls, no visits. Barbara started bringing me extra pudding cups and magazines without being asked, which somehow made it worse. Her pity was proof of how pathetic my situation had become. The man in the next bed asked if I had family. I lied and said they lived out of state. I remembered Dennis at 16 after his mother left us. He'd been so angry, throwing things in his room, barely speaking. I'd sat outside his door night after night, just being there. One evening he finally opened it, his eyes red from crying. Why did she leave? He'd asked. Did I do something wrong? You did nothing wrong, I'd told him, pulling him close. Sometimes people make choices we can't understand. But I'm here, son. I'll always be here for you. I'd kept that promise for 22 years, and now apparently my always had an expiration date. The third day I started doing math. My pension was $3,400 per month, comfortable enough for my simple needs. My savings account held $890,000, carefully accumulated over 4 decades of steady work and careful investing. The house on Desert Willow Drive was worth $680,000, paid off completely, sitting in one of Phoenix's better neighborhoods. I'd planned to leave it all to Dennis, naturally. What else was a father supposed to do? But lying there in that hospital bed, watching other people's families come and go, I started adding up Dennis's business loans instead. The $8,000 for a sure-thing investment opportunity, the $15,000 for startup capital, the $22,000 for expanding his network. 17 times over 3 years, always with a promissory note he signed without really reading, always with promises to pay me back when things took off. Things never took off. He still drove a leased BMW. Tiffany still posted pictures of $200 dinners, and I still had 17 signed IOS totaling $85,000. The fourth day, Barbara found me staring at my phone, my finger hovering over Dennis's number. "Don't," she said quietly. I looked up at her, surprised. "I've been a nurse for 28 years, she continued, checking my chart. "I've seen a lot of families in crisis. The ones who care are here. The ones who don't. Calling them just gives them another chance to hurt you." Her words settled into my chest like stones. She was right. If he cared, he'd be here. Calling him would just confirm what we both already knew, that I ranked somewhere below his dinner reservations. That night, I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Dennis, before Tiffany came into the picture. He'd just turned 35, successful and confident, and he'd taken me to dinner. His treat, he'd insisted. "Dad," he'd said over steaks, "I know I don't say it enough, but thank you. For everything, for raising me alone, for always being there, for teaching me what matters. I hope I can be half the man you are." I'd been so proud I'd nearly cried. What changed? When did gratitude curdle into resentment? When did I become an obstacle instead of a father? The fifth day dawned, and with it came a different kind of clarity. Pain has a way of burning through delusions. As I lay there, machines beeping steadily around me, I faced the truth I'd been avoiding. Dennis didn't just forget about me. He chose not to come. 5 days. 5 days of knowing his father was lying in a hospital bed, injured and alone, and he chose his dinner reservations, his golf games, his Instagram wife's brunch plans, over seeing if I was okay. That's when something inside me shifted. Not broke. Broke implies weakness. This was harder, colder. This was steel forging in fire. I'd spent my entire career preventing disasters, thinking 3 steps ahead, understanding that small problems, ignored, became catastrophic failures. I'd taught Dennis that same philosophy, though clearly it hadn't stuck. But it was still there in me, sharp and ready. If my son was waiting for his inheritance, treating me like an inconvenient delay before payday, then maybe it was time he learned an important lesson about assumptions, about taking things for granted, about what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. I pressed the call button. When Barbara came in, I asked her a question that made her eyebrows rise. "Is there any way you could bring me my laptop and phone from my personal effects? I have some business I need to take care of." She studied my face for a long moment, then smiled slowly. "Mr. Carter, I think that's the best idea you've had all week." As she left to retrieve my things, I stared at the ceiling and began planning. The old Amos would have waited, hoped Dennis would come around, given him another chance. But that Amos had died somewhere in the twisted metal on East Indian School Road. The man lying in this hospital bed was someone different, someone who understood that love without respect is just exploitation wearing a family name. My son wanted to wait for his inheritance? Fine. I'd make absolutely certain he got exactly what he deserved. Nothing. Barbara returned with my laptop and phone, both miraculously undamaged from the crash. She set them on the rolling table beside my bed, giving me a look that was equal parts curiosity and approval. "Whatever you're planning, mister." "Carter, I hope it works out the way you want it to." "Me too," I said, opening the laptop. My fingers felt stiff from lying in bed for days, but muscle memory took over quickly enough. The first thing I did was search for Dennis's employer, Southwest Industrial Solutions. Their website was professionally designed, full of corporate speak about innovative industrial equipment solutions and customer-centric approaches. The kind of language that sounds impressive but means nothing. Dennis fit right in there. I clicked through to the About Us section and found what I was looking for, a recent press release dated 2 months earlier. Southwest Industrial Solutions seeks growth capital for expansion. The article mentioned that owner Richard Holmes was looking for investors to fund a new manufacturing facility. The investment opportunity was for 30% equity in exchange for $450,000. Interesting. Very interesting. I spent the next hour digging deeper. LinkedIn showed me Richard Holmes's profile. 59 years old, started the company 20 years ago, solid reputation in the industrial equipment sector. He had connections with several people I'd worked with during my inspection career. The business world is smaller than people think, especially in a city like Phoenix. Then I did something I'd been putting off. I looked at Dennis's social media. His Facebook page was a carefully curated lie. Photos of him and Tiffany at expensive restaurants, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Captions about blessed life and success mindset. A picture from 2 weeks ago showed them at some charity gala. Dennis in a tuxedo, Tiffany in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The caption read, "Supporting our community's future leaders." Supporting them with what? My money that he'd borrowed and never returned? Tiffany's Instagram was worse. 30,000 followers watching her document a lifestyle funded by debt and my generosity. Pictures of her morning lattes, her yoga classes, her designer handbags. Each post tagged with aspirational hashtags. Hashtag luxury lifestyle, hashtag blessed, hashtag living my best life. One recent post showed her standing in front of my house, with the caption, "Can't wait for our next chapter in our dream home." They were already planning to take my house. Not after I died, they were actively planning it, posting about it, counting on it. I closed the laptop before I threw it across the room. The rage that filled me was cold and sharp, nothing like the hot anger I'd felt earlier. This was different. This was clarity. That evening I made a phone call. One of the benefits of spending 42 years in fire inspection is that you meet people. Lots of people. Contractors, building owners, city officials, lawyers. I'd helped a lot of them over the years, either by being thorough with my inspections and saving them from future disasters, or by being reasonable when minor issues came up. I called Tom Martinez, a former city building inspector who'd retired a few years before me. We'd worked together on several large commercial projects. After the usual pleasantries and his shocked concern about my accident, I asked him the question I'd called about. "Tom, do you remember that corporate lawyer who handled the Mitchell building dispute? The one who was so sharp with the contract negotiations?" "Robert Greene," Tom said immediately. "Best corporate attorney I've ever seen work. Why?" "I need someone good. Someone who can handle complex business transactions and estate planning. Think he'd take a consultation?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Amos, is everything okay? I mean, beyond the obvious injuries?" "Everything's fine," I lied smoothly. "Just want to make sure my affairs are in order. You know how it is after an accident. Makes you think about mortality." "I'll text you his number," Tom said. "Tell him I referred you. He owes me a favor anyway." The text came through 5 minutes later. I stared at Robert Greene's contact information, feeling something shift inside me. This was the moment. Once I made this call, I was committing to a path that would change everything. There would be no going back to the comfortable delusion that Dennis might somehow return to being the son I'd raised. I made the call. Robert Greene had a voice that matched his reputation. Confident, precise, professional. I explained who I was and that Tom Martinez had referred me. Then I said something that made him pause. "Mr. Greene, I'm currently in Phoenix Memorial Hospital, recovering from an accident. I need legal counsel for a business investment and some significant changes to my estate planning. I'm prepared to pay premium rates for discretion and speed." "What kind of business investment?" he asked, his interest clearly piqued. "I want to purchase equity in Southwest Industrial Solutions, and I want it done within the next week, before I'm discharged from this hospital." There was a longer pause. "That's Richard Holmes's company. I've done some work for him in the past. What percentage are you looking at?" "Whatever gives me meaningful voting rights, enough to have a say in management decisions." Another pause. I could practically hear him thinking. "Mr. Carter, why the urgency? And why from a hospital bed?" I made a decision then to trust him with at least part of the truth. "Mr. Greene, my son works for Southwest Industrial Solutions. He's also someone who recently demonstrated to me that he views my continued existence as an inconvenient delay to his inheritance. I'd like to make some adjustments to his expectations. Are you interested in helping me with that, or should I call someone else?" When Robert Greene laughed, it was a sound of genuine appreciation. "Mr. Carter, I think we're going to work very well together. I can be there tomorrow morning. Let me do some preliminary research tonight." After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. Maybe it was finally taking action instead of lying here passively. Maybe it was knowing I wasn't helpless, that I still had options and resources and, most importantly, the will to use them. Barbara came in to check my vitals around 8 that evening. She noticed the laptop and the notes I'd been taking. "You've been busy," she observed. "Just getting some things in order," I said. She adjusted my IV, then said quietly, "My mother went through something similar. Her son, my brother, barely visited her when she was sick, too busy with his own life. Then when she passed, he couldn't understand why the will left everything to charity." "Did she regret it?" Barbara smiled. "Not for a second. She said the only regret she had was not doing it sooner. Said it gave her peace, knowing her money would actually help people who appreciated it." After she left, I opened my laptop again and looked at one more thing: the Arizona Firefighters Charitable Foundation. They did good work, supporting injured firefighters and their families, providing scholarships for firefighters' kids, maintaining memorials for fallen heroes, the kind of work that actually mattered, the kind of legacy worth leaving. I was still awake when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter, this is Robert Greene. Preliminary research looks promising. Holmes is definitely seeking investors. Your timing is excellent. See you at 9 a.m. tomorrow." I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling of my hospital room, listening to the quiet beeps of machines and the distant sounds of nurses in the hallway. Somewhere out there, Dennis was probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming about the inheritance he'd already spent in his mind. Let him dream. Tomorrow I'd start building a very different future. Robert Greene arrived the next morning looking exactly like a man who charged premium rates. Tailored suit, leather briefcase, the kind of calm confidence that comes from winning battles in courtrooms and boardrooms. He was probably in his early 50s, fit, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Barbara showed him into my room, giving me a subtle thumbs up behind his back. Apparently, my lawyer passed her approval test. "Mr. Carter," he said, shaking my hand firmly despite my hospital gown and IV. "Tom Martinez speaks very highly of you. He also mentioned you once caught a major electrical code violation that would have burned down a warehouse full of people." "Just doing my job," I said, "though I appreciate Tom remembering." Greene pulled a chair close to my bed and opened his briefcase, extracting a tablet and a notepad. "I've done my homework on Southwest Industrial Solutions. Richard Holmes started the company in 2005, has built it into a solid mid-sized operation. Annual revenue around $12 million, healthy profit margins, good reputation. The expansion he's planning makes sense. There's demand in the market. And the investment opportunity? Still available. He's been looking for the right investor for about 3 months. The deal he's offering is 30% equity for $450,000. That gives voting rights on major decisions, including personnel matters at the executive level." I smiled. "What if I offered more? Say $480,000 for 32%? Greene's eyebrows rose. "You'd get his attention. May I ask why you want to overpay?" "Because I want the deal done quickly and I want those voting rights. How fast can we make this happen? If the due diligence checks out, and I'll verify everything, we could have an agreement in principle within 48 hours, finalized within a week. But Mr. Carter, I need to ask, are you certain about this? That's more than half your liquid assets based on what you've told me." I'd already thought through this. "I'm 68 years old, Mr. Greene. I have a pension that covers all my needs, a paid-off house, and more money than I'll ever spend. The question isn't whether I can afford this investment. The question is whether it's worth it to me. And yes, it absolutely is." He studied me for a long moment. "This is about your son." "This is about justice," I corrected. "My son has borrowed $85,000 from me over the past 3 years. Never repaid a cent. He's been waiting for me to die so he can inherit my house and savings. 5 days ago, I nearly died in a car accident. He visited me once for 20 minutes, complained about the inconvenience, and hasn't been back since. Green's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. And now you want to become a co-owner of the company where he works. I want to ensure that my assets go to people who deserve them. If that happens to involve making some strategic business decisions along the way, well, that's just responsible investing. A slight smile crossed Green's face. I'll reach out to Richard Holmes this afternoon. In the meantime, we should discuss your estate planning. You mentioned wanting to make changes. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Green took detailed notes as I explained what I wanted. A new will that left everything to the Arizona Firefighters Charitable Foundation. A living trust that couldn't be contested. Documentation of all the loans I'd made to Dennis, complete with his signed promissory notes. These notes are gold, Green said, examining the documents I'd had Barbara retrieve from my house safe. He signed all of them, acknowledged the debt, promised repayment. This is legally enforceable. I never intended to enforce them, I admitted. He's my son. I thought he'd eventually pay me back, or at least appreciate what I'd done for him. But now? Now I want options. I'm not making any decisions yet about calling in the debt, but I want to know I could if I needed to. Green nodded approvingly. Smart. Never limit your options until you have to. I'll also recommend we hire a private investigator. If we're going to make changes to your estate and potentially take action regarding your son, we should know exactly what his financial situation looks like. Are you comfortable with that? The question surprised me. Is that normal? In cases like this? Absolutely. You'd be amazed what people hide when they think there's money coming their way. An investigator can give us a complete picture. Debts, assets, spending patterns, any legal issues. Information is power, Mr. Carter. Do it, I said. I want to know everything. Green made a note. I know someone excellent, discreet, thorough, fast. Gerald Morris, former police detective, now runs his own investigation firm. I'll have him contact you today. After Green left to start making calls, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The pain medication was keeping the worst of my injuries at bay, but I could feel every broken rib when I breathed, every staple holding my lacerated scalp together. My body was broken, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. That afternoon, my phone rang from another unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Gerald Morris. Robert Green asked me to reach out. Morris had a gravelly voice that sounded like he'd spent 30 years interviewing suspects in interrogation rooms. Green had briefed him on the basics. I understand you want a comprehensive financial investigation on your son and daughter-in-law. How deep do you want me to go? Everything, I said. Bank accounts, credit cards, debts, spending patterns, property records. I want to know what they have, what they owe, what they're planning. I can do that. Give me 72 hours. My rate is $200 per hour plus expenses. This kind of investigation usually runs around $3,000 to $5,000. That work for you? Whatever it costs. Just be thorough. One more thing, Morris said. Green mentioned your son works at Southwest Industrial Solutions. You want me to look into his professional conduct as well? Expense reports, client relationships, that kind of thing? I hadn't even thought of that. Yes, everything. 2 days later, I got the call from Robert Green that I'd been waiting for. Richard Holmes wants to meet you. He's intrigued by your offer and your background. I've vouched for you. Sent him your financial verification from the bank. He'd like to do a video call tomorrow afternoon. Are you up for it? Absolutely. The next day, the day before I was scheduled to be discharged, I sat up in my hospital bed with my laptop, positioned on the rolling table. At exactly 2 p.m., the video call connected, and Richard Holmes's face filled the screen. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tan that comes from playing golf on weekday afternoons. He smiled warmly. Mr. Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Robert tells me you were in quite an accident. I'll heal, I said simply. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Well, your offer certainly caught my attention. $480,000 for 32% equity is more generous than what I'd proposed. May I ask why you're interested in Southwest Industrial Solutions? I'd prepared for this question. Mr. Holmes, I spent over 4 decades in fire inspection. I've seen a lot of businesses come and go. The ones that survive are the ones that make quality products and treat their people right. From everything I've researched, your company does both. I'm at a point in my life where I want my money working for something worthwhile, not just sitting in a bank account. This seemed like a good fit. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Robert has verified your financial capacity and sent me your background. Your reputation in the inspection community is impeccable. Several people I reached out to spoke very highly of you. That's kind of them. I do have one concern, Holmes said, his expression becoming more serious. One of my regional managers is a Dennis Carter. Any relation? Here it was, the moment where I had to decide how much truth to tell. I opted for careful honesty. He's my son. And no, Mr. Holmes, he doesn't know I'm making this investment. Frankly, he and I aren't on the best terms right now, but I want to be clear. This investment is about the business opportunity, not about him. I trust you'll evaluate all your employees on their merits, regardless of their personal relationships. Holmes studied me through the screen for a long moment. I appreciate your directness, Mr. Carter. And yes, all employees are evaluated on performance. That's how we've built this company. Then I think we'll work well together. We spent another 30 minutes discussing the details. Holmes asked intelligent questions about my expectations, my timeline, my understanding of the industry. I answered honestly, emphasizing that I was looking for a solid investment with good management, not trying to run the company myself. When the call ended, Holmes smiled. I'll have my lawyers draw up the agreements. If everything proceeds smoothly, we should be finalized within the week. Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter. After the screen went dark, I sat back against my pillows, my heart racing. It was done. Or at least, it was started. The next morning, I'd be discharged. Dennis still hadn't called, still hadn't visited beyond that first disastrous 20 minutes. He had no idea what was coming. That evening, Gerald Morris sent through his preliminary report. I opened it on my laptop and started reading. With each page, my jaw tightened. Dennis and Tiffany had credit card debt totaling $67,000. Their townhouse had a mortgage of $2,800 per month that they were consistently late on. Tiffany's Instagram influencer career brought in maybe $800 a month, not even enough to cover her shopping addiction. The real kicker was buried on page 7, email exchanges with a real estate agent about listing my house, dated 3 weeks before my accident. They'd been planning this even while I was healthy. The report also detailed Dennis's expense account at work, $12,400 in questionable charges over 6 months. Dinners marked as client meetings that were actually dates with Tiffany. A weekend trip to Sedona listed as a team-building event. That was just the two of them. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. My son wasn't just ungrateful. He was actively defrauding his employer and planning to steal my house before I was even gone. And that's when I understood exactly how to repay them. Not with anger, not with revenge, with simple, beautiful justice. The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. I was being discharged. My hip was still fractured, but healing well enough that I could manage with a walker and pain medication. The ribs would take longer, and the concussion required me to take it easy for several weeks. But I was going home. Barbara came in early to help me get ready. She'd been my advocate, my witness, and in some strange way my accomplice through all of this. As she helped me into the wheelchair, hospital policy, even though I could walk with the walker, she squeezed my shoulder. "Your son hasn't called," she said quietly. "Not once since that first visit." "I know," I said. "I've been counting." She helped me gather my few belongings. The laptop, my phone, the documents Robert Greene had brought for me to sign. Everything was packed into a small bag. My truck was totaled, so I'd arranged for a car service to take me home. Greene had offered to pick me up, but I'd declined. I had one more thing to do before I left this place. "Barbara," I said as she wheeled me toward the elevator, "I need you to do me a favor." "Anything, Mr. Carter." "Dennis will probably show up today. Maybe not to see me, maybe just to deal with the hospital bill or pick up my belongings. When he does, I need you to give him something." I handed her a white envelope. Inside was Robert Greene's business card and a note I'd written that morning. "Monday at 9 a.m., Mr. Holmes's office. Don't be late. Dad." She took the envelope, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're sure about this?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." The car service took me to my house on Desert Willow Drive. The desert morning was sharp and clear, the kind of Phoenix day that reminds you why people move to Arizona. My house looked the same as always. Single-story ranch-style, desert landscaping, the American flag I'd flown since my first day as a fire inspector, still hanging by the front door. Getting inside with the walker was awkward, but I managed. The house felt empty without me in it for nearly a week, but it was still mine. Every corner held memories, some good, many now tainted by the realization of how Dennis truly saw this place. Not as home, but as real estate. Not as his inheritance of memories, but as dollars waiting to be liquidated. I'd barely settled into my recliner when my phone buzzed. Robert Greene. "Everything's signed and finalized. You're officially a 32% owner of Southwest Industrial Solutions with full voting rights. Holmes is pleased. Documents are being filed today. Congratulations." I smiled. Phase 1 complete. The next message was from Gerald Morris. "Full report sent to your email. You're going to want to read this sitting down. Some interesting developments regarding your daughter-in-law's plans." I opened my laptop and read Morris's complete investigation. The preliminary report had been damning enough, but this was devastating. Tiffany had been in contact with a divorce attorney for over a year, not planning to leave Dennis now, but planning to leave him the moment I died and the inheritance cleared. The email chain was explicit. "Once his father passes and we sell the house, I'll file. Should clear at least $700,000 after paying off Dennis's debts. Standard split gives me $350,000 plus alimony." She'd been playing a long game, and Dennis was just as much her mark as I was. The report also detailed Dennis's expense account fraud more thoroughly. The $12,400 wasn't just questionable, it was blatant theft. Dinners at expensive steakhouses marked as client development, when the only other person present was Tiffany. A weekend at a luxury resort in Sedona, listed as a team-building retreat, with no other attendees. Spa treatments, shopping sprees, even a pair of $800 golf clubs charged to the company card. Richard Holmes would have grounds for immediate termination and possibly criminal charges, if he chose to pursue them. I spent the rest of that day resting, letting my body heal while my mind worked through the next steps. Greene would meet with me the following day, Saturday, to finalize the will changes and set up the living trust. Everything had to be ironclad. No loopholes, no room for Dennis to challenge anything. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice, professional but warm. "This is Barbara Richards from Phoenix Memorial. I'm calling from my personal phone because I thought you'd want to know. Your son just showed up at the hospital." My pulse quickened. "What happened?" "He came to the registration desk, asked about you in a way that—" She paused, and I could hear the disgust in her voice, even through the phone. "He called you that old fool. Asked when we were finally discharging you. Said he needed to pick up your things and close out the bill. He seemed annoyed, Mr. Carter. Not worried, annoyed." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd expected nothing better. "What did you tell him?" "Exactly what you asked me to. I told him you'd been discharged this morning and that you were doing well. Then I told him about the company purchase." I sat forward in my chair despite the pain in my ribs. "How did he react?" Barbara's voice took on a note of satisfaction. "Mr. Carter, I've been a nurse for 28 years. I've given families bad news about terminal diagnoses, told parents their children didn't survive surgery, informed spouses that their loved ones had passed. I've seen every possible reaction to devastating news." She paused for effect. "I have never seen someone's face go that particular shade of gray. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His phone literally fell out of his hands and clattered on the floor. Several other people in the waiting area turned to stare. He just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, no sound coming out. I found myself smiling despite everything. Did you give him the envelope? I did. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open it. When he saw your note about the Monday meeting, I thought he might actually faint. He stumbled out of the hospital without another word, left his phone on the floor. Someone had to run after him with it. Thank you, Barbara, for everything. Mr. Carter, I hope whatever you're planning works out exactly the way you want it to. That young man needs to learn what it means to have consequences. After we hung up, I sat in my recliner, looking out at the desert sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere out there, Dennis was probably in full panic mode, calling Tiffany, trying to figure out what had just happened. Trying to understand how his father, the old fool he'd abandoned in a hospital, had somehow bought a controlling interest in his company. Let him panic. Let him spend the weekend wondering. Let him try to figure out what I was planning, knowing he couldn't stop it, couldn't control it, couldn't manipulate his way out of it. The next morning, Robert Greene arrived right on schedule. We spent 3 hours at my dining room table, going over every detail of the new estate plan. The will was simple and brutal. Everything to the Arizona Firefighters Charitable Foundation. Not a single dollar to Dennis. The living trust made it contestation-proof, locked in so tight that no lawyer in the state could crack it. This is solid, Greene said, packing up his briefcase. If your son tries to challenge this, he'll just waste money on legal fees. There's no angle here. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. After Greene left, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I being too harsh? Too vindictive? Then I remembered Dennis's voice on that phone call in the hospital. Just another bill we'll have to deal with. I remembered 5 days of silence. I remembered his words to Barbara. That old fool. No, this wasn't vindictive. This was justice. Sunday passed quietly. I didn't hear from Dennis, not a call, not a text, nothing. Part of me had wondered if he'd show up at my door, demanding answers. But apparently even now, even in crisis, he couldn't bring himself to actually face me. That told me everything I needed to know about the man he'd become. Monday morning dawned clear and hot. I dressed carefully, a suit I hadn't worn in months, my best tie, polished shoes. My hip protested every movement, and the ribs sent sharp pains through my chest when I bent to tie my shoes. But I pushed through. Pain was temporary. This moment was forever. Robert Greene picked me up at 8:30. The ride to Southwest Industrial Solutions headquarters on North Central Avenue took 20 minutes through Phoenix morning traffic. Greene and I didn't talk much. We both knew what was about to happen. Richard Holmes's office was on the 5th floor, a corner suite with windows overlooking the city. His assistant showed us in at precisely 9 o'clock. Holmes stood to greet us, shaking my hand warmly. Amos, good to see you up and about. How are you healing? Better every day, I said, settling carefully into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Greene sat beside me, briefcase in his lap, the very picture of legal propriety. Dennis should be here any moment, Holmes said, glancing at his watch. I have to say, this is an unusual situation. I've never had a co-owner who's also the parent of an employee. I appreciate you handling this professionally, I said. I want you to know, my investment in this company is genuine. This isn't just about Dennis, but what happens here today is necessary. Holmes nodded slowly. Gerald Morris's report was very thorough. The expense account issues alone would be grounds for termination. I know. At 9:08, there was a knock on the door. Dennis entered, and I had to suppress my reaction to his appearance. He looked terrible. Pale, dark circles under his eyes. His usually immaculate suit rumpled. He'd clearly spent the weekend in absolute turmoil. His eyes found me immediately, and something flickered across his face. Shock, anger, betrayal, panic, all of it cycling through in seconds. Then he saw Robert Greene, and his face went even paler. Dennis, Holmes said, his voice professionally neutral. Please sit down. Dennis sat in the chair farthest from me, his movements jerky and uncertain. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles went white. I'd seen that posture before in buildings I'd inspected where the owner knew they'd failed code and were about to face consequences. The body language of someone who knows they're caught, but is still desperately hoping for an escape route. There wasn't going to be one. Holmes began, his tone measured and professional. Dennis, as you now know, Mr. Carter has become a significant investor in Southwest Industrial Solutions. He holds 32% equity with full voting rights. As part of his due diligence before making this investment, we conducted a comprehensive review of all departments and personnel. Dennis's eyes darted to me, then away. He couldn't hold my gaze. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable. Let him feel the way I'd felt lying in that hospital bed, abandoned and alone. Holmes continued. Unfortunately, this review uncovered some serious concerns regarding your performance and conduct. Over the past 6 months, your sales numbers have declined by 18%. We've received multiple client complaints about delayed responses and missed follow-ups. More significantly, Holmes paused, and I watched Dennis's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. More significantly, there are substantial irregularities with your expense account. I can explain, Dennis started, his voice cracking. Let me finish, Holmes said, his tone hardening. The irregularities total $12,400. Restaurant charges listed as client meetings where no clients were present. A weekend resort stay marked as team building when you were the only employee in attendance. Personal purchases charged to the company card and disguised as business expenses. Dennis's face had gone from pale to an ashen gray that reminded me of cigarette ash. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'd seen this expression before, the exact moment when someone realizes they're utterly trapped, that all their excuses and justifications are about to crumble. Robert Greene calmly opened his briefcase and removed a manila folder. He placed it on Holmes's desk, then slid it toward Dennis. These are copies of the receipts and expense reports in question, along with photographic evidence and witness statements. The original documents have been provided to Mr. Holmes and are now part of the company's official records. Dennis's hands trembled as he reached for the folder. He flipped it open, and I watched the color drain even further from his face as he recognized the evidence. Photos of him and Tiffany at an expensive steakhouse, toasting with champagne. Receipts from the Sedona resort showing spa treatments and room service. Credit card statements with his signature, each charge meticulously marked as business development or client relations. Dennis's voice was barely a whisper. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like fraud, I said, speaking for the first time since he'd entered the room. My voice came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't try to warm it. It looks like theft. It looks like exactly what it is. Dennis's head snapped toward me, and for just a moment, I saw anger flash in his eyes. You did this. You set me up. You bought into my company just to... Your company? I interrupted, my tone sharp. This isn't your company, Dennis. You're an employee who's been stealing from his employer while waiting for his father to die so you could sell his house and pay off your debts. His face went impossibly, even more pale. How did I know? I almost laughed. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? The real estate agent you contacted 3 weeks before my accident? The emails discussing listing prices and sale timelines. You were planning to sell my house while I was still alive enough to live in it. Holmes cleared his throat. Gentlemen, let's keep this professional. Dennis, given the evidence presented and the violation of company policy regarding expense accounts, I'm left with no choice. Your employment with Southwest Industrial Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dennis just stared at Holmes, then at me, then back at Holmes. You can't... I have bills. I have a mortgage. You can't just... We can, and we are, Holmes said firmly. Your severance package will be the minimum required by your contract. 2 weeks' salary. Given the circumstances, you should consider yourself fortunate we're not pursuing criminal charges for fraud. 2 weeks? Dennis's voice rose, panic finally breaking through his shock. That's $3,000. I owe $67,000. My mortgage is $2,800 a month. I need this job. Perhaps, I said quietly, my eyes locked on his. You should have thought about that before you called me that old fool at the hospital registration desk. Before you disappeared for 5 days while I lay there with broken bones, wondering if my only child cared whether I lived or died. Dennis's mouth fell open. The color that had drained from his face now rushed back in a crimson flush of shame and rage. That nurse told you? She had no right. She had every right, I said, my voice hardening, just like I have every right to choose what happens to my money, my house, and my legacy. You want to know what really happened here, Dennis? You made a bet. You bet that I was weak, that I was too old, too trusting, too pathetic to fight back. You bet that you could treat me like garbage, and I'd still leave you everything when I died. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs. You lost that bet. Dennis was shaking now, his whole body trembling with some combination of rage and panic and disbelief. This is insane. You're my father. You're supposed to... I'm supposed to what? I interrupted. Love you unconditionally. Support you no matter how you treat me. Enable your theft and your fraud and your complete lack of basic human decency. I shook my head. I did love you unconditionally, Dennis. I gave you everything I had, and you threw it back in my face. Mr. Holmes, Robert Greene said smoothly, I believe we've covered everything needed for the termination, unless there's anything else. Holmes stood, signaling the meeting was over. Dennis, you'll need to return your company phone, laptop, and access card to security on your way out. They'll escort you to collect your personal items from your office. Dennis didn't move. He sat there, staring at all of us like we were strangers speaking a foreign language. Then suddenly he lunged forward, his hands gripping the edge of Holmes's desk. Dad, please, I'm sorry. I know I've been a terrible son, but this is my career. This is my life. You can't destroy everything because of one mistake. One mistake, I said, my voice deadly quiet. You think this is about one mistake? This is about 3 years of watching you change into someone I don't recognize. Someone who married a woman who sees me as nothing but a dollar sign. Someone who borrowed $85,000 from me and never repaid a cent. Someone who abandoned his father in a hospital for 5 days and then showed up asking when they'd finally discharge the old fool. Dennis's hand slipped off the desk. He stood there, swaying slightly, his eyes wet with tears that I suspected had more to do with panic than remorse. What about the money I borrowed? You can't seriously expect me to pay that back now. I'm losing my job. Robert Greene pulled another document from his briefcase. Actually, those loans are the next item we need to discuss. Mr. Carter has decided to formally demand repayment of the full $85,000, as is his legal right. You signed promissory notes for each loan, acknowledging the debt and promising repayment. The first payment of $2,500 is due within 30 days. Dennis's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed back into the chair, his head in his hands. I don't have $2,500. I don't have anything. This is going to ruin me. No, I said, standing up with my walker, Greene steadying me with a hand on my elbow. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. I looked at him one more time. This man who used to be my son, who used to run to greet me after work, who used to think I was brave. Now he just looked small and pathetic, crumpled in that chair with his designer suit and his shattered dreams. I'm 68 years old, Dennis. I thought I'd raised you to be better than this. To be honest, to be kind, to value people over possessions. Clearly I failed, but I won't compound that failure by rewarding your behavior with an inheritance you don't deserve. You're going to disinherit me? His voice was barely audible. Over this? The papers were signed 3 days ago, I said. Everything goes to the Arizona Firefighters Charitable Foundation. Your name isn't mentioned in my will at all. I turned to leave, Greene holding the door open for me. Behind us, I heard Dennis make a sound, half sob, half gasp. But I didn't look back. Looking back would imply I still cared about what he was feeling, and that well had run dry. As Greene and I walked to the elevator, I could hear Dennis's voice rising in Holmes's office, desperation turning to anger. But the words didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was the clean, sharp satisfaction of knowing that justice, real, tangible justice, had been served. In the elevator going down, Greene said quietly, "That was one of the most brutal professional terminations I've ever witnessed. Was I too harsh?" He shook his head. "After reading Morris's full report and seeing those expense receipts? No. If anything, you were restrained. Holmes could have filed criminal charges." The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Through the glass windows, I could see Phoenix spreading out under the morning sun. My city, where I'd spent 4 decades making sure people were safe, where I'd built a life and raised a son and tried to do everything right. Sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. Sometimes the people you love most will disappoint you in ways you never imagined possible. But that doesn't mean you stop standing up for what's right. It just means you do it with your eyes open, without illusions, without the false hope that they'll suddenly change. Dennis had made his choices. Now he'd live with them, and I'd finally be free. I didn't hear from Dennis for the rest of that day. Not a phone call, not a text, not even an angry voicemail. The silence was profound and somehow more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. He was out there somewhere, his world crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Robert Greene called that evening. I thought you'd want to know. Dennis tried to contact Richard Holmes this afternoon. 3 times. Holmes didn't take the calls. Smart man, I said. There's more. Our office received a call from an attorney named Marcus Webb. He's representing Dennis. Wanted to know if there was any room for negotiation on the employment termination. I felt my jaw tighten. Already lawyering up? It's a waste of his money. I told Webb the same thing I'm telling you. The termination was by the book. Fully documented, legally airtight. Dennis has no grounds for wrongful termination. If anything, Holmes could have pressed charges for fraud. What did Webb say to that? Green's voice carried a hint of amusement. He got very quiet, then asked how much I thought a consultation had cost his client. I told him my retainer alone would have been $5,000. He hung up shortly after. $5,000 Dennis didn't have, spent on a lawyer who couldn't help him. The irony wasn't lost on me. How many times had I given him money that he'd wasted? Now he was burning through what little he had left, grasping at straws that were already slipping through his fingers. That weekend passed quietly for me. I spent the time resting, letting my body heal. The ribs still ached, my hip protested every movement, but I was improving. More importantly, my mind was clear for the first time in years. No more wondering when Dennis would call, what he needed, whether he'd ever pay me back. That weight was gone. What I didn't know then, but found out later from Gerald Morris, was that Dennis's weekend had been chaos. According to Morris's surveillance report, Dennis had driven to my house twice. The first time was Saturday afternoon. He'd pulled up in his BMW, sat in the car for 10 minutes just staring at the house, then finally got out and walked to the front door. He'd knocked, rang the doorbell, peered through the windows. I wasn't home. I'd gone to a follow-up doctor's appointment, but even if I had been, I wouldn't have answered. The second time was Sunday morning. This time he'd brought Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the Instagram influencer with champagne tastes and a beer budget. Morris had photos of them arguing in the driveway. Tiffany's face was red with anger, her hands gesturing wildly. Dennis looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his whole posture screaming desperation. They'd tried to get in through the back gate, found it locked. Tiffany had actually attempted to climb over it before Dennis pulled her back. The neighbors must have been thoroughly entertained. Morris called me Sunday evening to brief me. Your son is spiraling. He's made 17 phone calls in the past 2 days to various law offices. Most won't take him as a client once they hear the basics. The few who will are quoting retainers he can't afford. What about Tiffany? She's the interesting one, Morris said. I've been monitoring her social media like you asked. She hasn't posted anything since Friday. For someone who posts 3 times a day minimum, that's significant. Her followers are starting to notice. Comments asking if she's okay, if everything's all right. She's not responding to any of them. Their perfect life is falling apart. Faster than they can contain it, Morris confirmed. Also, I have some additional information you might want to see about Tiffany's long-term plans. I found email correspondence that's illuminating. Send it over. The email chain Morris sent me was dated over a year ago, long before my accident, before any of this started. Tiffany had been in contact with a divorce attorney named Patricia Winters, discussing separation strategy. The emails were cold and calculating, discussing asset division, alimony calculations, timeline strategies. The most damning email was from 8 months ago. I think we should wait until his father passes. Dennis will inherit the house, worth at least $680,000, plus whatever savings the old man has. Once that's settled and we've paid off our debts, that's when I'll file. No point in divorcing a broke man when I can divorce one with assets. She'd never loved Dennis. She'd been playing the long game, waiting for me to die so she could cash out my life savings and leave my son with nothing. The rage I felt reading those emails wasn't hot and explosive. It was ice cold and absolute. This woman had been living in my son's home, eating meals I'd helped pay for with those loans, posting pictures of her perfect life while plotting to destroy what little family I had left. I forwarded the emails to Green. Is there any legal way to show these to Dennis? Not directly from you without revealing the surveillance, Green replied. But sometimes documents find their way to people through anonymous channels. Hypothetically speaking, I understood what he was suggesting. Hypothetically, how would one ensure such documents reach the intended recipient? A manila envelope, no return address, mailed from a public mailbox, hypothetically. I smiled. That's very hypothetical of you, Robert. The following week, I took the next step I'd been planning. Through Green, I had formal demand letters sent to Dennis for the repayment of the $85,000 in loans. Each letter referenced the specific promissory note he'd signed, included copies of the original documents with his signature clearly visible, and demanded payment of $2,500 within 30 days, with a payment plan for the remainder. I knew he couldn't pay. That wasn't the point. The point was to make everything official, documented, legally incontestable. If he ignored the demand, which he would, I could pursue collection through the courts, wage garnishment, asset seizure, all perfectly legal, all thoroughly deserved. Green had warned me, this will destroy any remaining relationship you have with your son. Robert, I'd said, that relationship was already destroyed. I'm just making sure he understands the consequences of his choices. 2 weeks after Dennis's termination, I got a call from Richard Holmes. Amos, I wanted to update you on a few things. First, the quarterly numbers are looking excellent. Your investment is already showing returns. Second, I've promoted Sarah Chen to regional sales manager. She's been with us for 6 years. Consistently top performer, no ethical concerns. She's already improving team morale. Sounds like the right choice. There's one more thing, Holmes said, his tone shifting slightly. Dennis tried to come to the office yesterday. Security stopped him at the lobby. He was demanding to see me, to see you, shouting about unfair treatment. We had to call the police to escort him out. I closed my eyes. My son being escorted from his workplace by police. The image should have broken my heart. Instead, I just felt tired. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Not your fault. But Amos, I need to ask, are you okay with how this is playing out? I know this can't be easy, even if it's necessary. Was I okay? I thought about that question for a long moment. Was I okay watching my only child's life fall apart? Was I okay being the architect of his downfall? Richard, I finally said, I spent 38 years raising that boy, gave him everything I had, and when I was lying in a hospital bed, broken and alone, he called me that old fool and abandoned me. Whatever's happening to him now isn't my doing. It's the natural consequence of his choices. Fair enough, Holmes said quietly. I just wanted to make sure you're at peace with it. After we hung up, I sat in my recliner, looking out at the desert landscape I'd called home for 4 decades. Was I at peace? Not entirely. There was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that still remembered the little boy who'd hugged me and called me brave. That still hoped somewhere inside the man Dennis had become, that boy was still there. But hope without evidence is just wishful thinking. And all the evidence pointed to one conclusion. My son had chosen money over family, greed over character, convenience over loyalty. I'd given him every chance to choose differently. He'd failed every single one. My phone buzzed with a text from Morris. Package delivered to subject's residence. Confirmation of receipt via doorbell camera. Subject's wife retrieved it personally. The emails about Tiffany's divorce plans had reached their destination. Now Dennis would know the truth about the woman he'd chosen over his own father. Now he'd understand that he'd been played just as thoroughly as he'd tried to play me. I imagined him reading those emails, the shock, the betrayal, the realization that everything he'd sacrificed, his integrity, his relationship with me, his career, had been for a woman who was just waiting for the right moment to leave him. It was almost poetic. My sharp sense of humor, the one that had gotten me through 42 years of dealing with code violations and bureaucratic nonsense, appreciated the symmetry. Dennis had treated me like a means to an end. Now he'd discover he'd been treated the same way. As the phoenix sun set in shades of orange and gold, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not happiness. This whole situation was too broken for happiness. But satisfaction that justice, real and tangible, was being served. Dennis had wanted to wait for his inheritance. Now he'd have nothing to inherit. He'd wanted my house. Now he'd lose his own. He'd thought I was too old, too weak, too trusting to fight back. He'd been catastrophically wrong about all three. The fallout came faster than I'd anticipated. 3 days after the anonymous package was delivered, Morris called with an update. Your daughter-in-law has moved out, confirmed by neighbors and social media activity. She's posted a vague statement about taking time for personal growth and reevaluating life priorities. The comments are mostly confused followers asking what happened. And Dennis? Still in the townhouse, alone. I drove by yesterday. Place looks neglected. Mail piling up. Newspapers on the driveway. He's not handling this well. Part of me felt the pull of paternal instinct, the urge to check on him, to make sure he was okay. But I'd learned that some lessons can only be taught through consequences, not comfort. If I intervened now, I'd just be enabling the same pattern that had brought us here. Keep monitoring, I told Morris. Let me know if anything changes. That weekend, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Dad? Dennis's voice was rough, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. Probably both. Dad, please, I need to talk to you. Every instinct I'd developed as a father screamed at me to help him. But I'd spent 5 days in a hospital, learning to ignore those instincts. I have nothing to say to you, Dennis. She was going to leave me, Tiffany. She was planning it for over a year. She was just waiting for you to die so she could take half of everything. I know, I said simply. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, you knew? How did you... Understanding dawned. You sent me those emails. I wanted you to know the truth about who you chose over your own father. I didn't choose her over you. His voice cracked with desperation. I made mistakes. I know I did. But you destroyed my entire life, my job, my marriage, my reputation. No, I interrupted, my voice hard. You destroyed your own life. You stole from your employer. You abandoned your father. You treated me like an inconvenient obstacle to your inheritance. All I did was stop enabling your behavior. The loan demands, Dad, you know I can't pay that back. Not now. You're going to ruin me financially. Then you should have considered that before you borrowed money you never intended to return. Those were loans, Dennis, not gifts. You signed promissory notes, legally binding documents acknowledging your debt. But I'm your son. The desperation in his voice was almost painful to hear. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? The question hit harder than I expected. I took a breath, steadying myself. It did mean something. It meant everything. But you threw that away when you decided I was worth more to you, dead than alive. When you called me that old fool and abandoned me in a hospital. When you borrowed my money and never paid it back. When you planned to sell my house before I was cold in the ground. I never actually sold the house. We just talked to a realtor. The intent was the same, I said, and intent reveals character. Your character, Dennis, is severely lacking. So what? You're just going to cut me off completely? Destroy everything I've built? I almost laughed at that. Everything you've built? You mean the career you built on fraud, the marriage you built on your wife's greed, the lifestyle you built on my money? None of that was real, Dennis. I'm just removing the scaffolding and letting you see what's actually there. I hate you. His voice was quiet but filled with venom. I hate what you've done to me. No, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. You hate what you've done to yourself. You just can't admit it yet. Goodbye, Dennis. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, not from fear or regret, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally, completely severing the cord. That was the last conversation I'd have with my son. I knew it with absolute certainty. The next week brought more developments. Dennis's townhouse went into foreclosure proceedings. The bank had tired of his missed mortgage payments. Tiffany filed for divorce officially, claiming irreconcilable differences. Her Instagram had pivoted to a new narrative. The brave woman escaping a toxic relationship, rebuilding her life, finding her authentic self. Her followers ate it up. Dennis, meanwhile, had disappeared from social media entirely. Morris reported that he'd taken a job at a retail store in Tempe. Assistant manager position, maybe $40,000 a year if he was lucky. His BMW had been repossessed. He was driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic now. The fall from regional sales manager to retail assistant manager must have been devastating. Good. In April, I received the formal divorce papers, not because I was involved, but because the proceedings mentioned the $85,000 debt Dennis owed me as a marital liability. Tiffany's attorney was trying to argue that half of that debt should be her responsibility. My attorney shut that down immediately with copies of the promissory notes, showing Dennis as the sole borrower. She'd married him for money and was now trying to avoid his debts. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. By May, the debt collection process had begun in earnest. Dennis had ignored all payment demands, so Green filed the necessary paperwork with the courts. A judgment was entered against Dennis for the full $85,000, plus interest and legal fees. His wages would be garnished, his credit destroyed. Any assets he managed to acquire would be subject to seizure. This will follow him for years, Green warned me, possibly decades. Are you certain you want to pursue this to the full extent? I thought about the question carefully. Did I want to financially devastate my son for the next 20 years? Yes. Yes, I did. Because maybe, just maybe, the experience of losing everything would teach him the lesson that my love and patience never could. That actions have consequences, that people aren't resources to be exploited, that character matters more than cash. Pursue it, I told Green, all the way. Meanwhile, my own life had taken a turn for the better. The investment in Southwest Industrial Solutions was performing excellently. The company's expansion was ahead of schedule, and my equity stake was worth more than I'd paid for it. Holmes had invited me to monthly board meetings, valuing my input on safety protocols and building standards. I'd also started a project I'd been putting off for years, cataloging and restoring my collection of vintage fire inspection badges. I set up a small workshop in my spare bedroom, bought the proper tools and materials, and dove in. The meticulous work was meditative, each badge a piece of history that deserved to be preserved. I even started a blog about it, sharing photos and stories behind the badges. To my surprise, it attracted a small but dedicated following of other collectors and fire service history enthusiasts. Every few days, someone would comment or email, asking questions, sharing their own collections, telling stories about their careers in fire service. It reminded me why I'd chosen that career in the first place, not for money or glory, but because it meant something, because protecting people mattered, because doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it wasn't appreciated, was its own reward. Dennis had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. Maybe he'd never really learned it at all. In June, I got word that Tiffany's divorce was finalized. She'd walked away with almost nothing. Their townhouse was underwater on the mortgage. Their debts exceeded their assets, and the court had no sympathy for her claims. She'd played a long game and lost spectacularly. Her Instagram following had dropped to 18,000. Turns out people lose interest quickly when the luxury lifestyle photos stop coming. Her last post was a sunset photo with some quote about resilience. 300 likes. 42 comments, most of them bots. As summer arrived in Phoenix, bringing the brutal heat that makes life here feel like living in an oven, I found myself at peace for the first time in years. My body had healed. The hip was strong again, the ribs no longer ached. Even the headaches from the concussion had faded. I could walk without the walker, drive without pain, live without limitation. More importantly, my mind had healed. The constant worry about Dennis, the anxiety about his requests for money, the guilt about whether I was doing enough, all of it was gone. I'd given him everything a father could give, and when that wasn't enough, I'd given him the one thing he actually needed: consequences. Whether he learned from them or not was no longer my responsibility. I'd done my part. The rest was up to him. And if we never spoke again, if I never saw my son's face or heard his voice, or knew whether he ever became the man I'd hoped he'd be, that would hurt. But I'd survive it, because I'd survived everything else, and I'd learned that sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks your heart, especially when it breaks your heart. Summer turned to fall, and with it came the final pieces of Dennis's collapse. Gerald Morris's surveillance reports painted a picture that was almost painful to read. Dennis had lost the townhouse to foreclosure in July. The bank had been patient, more patient than they needed to be, but eventually patience runs out. Morris had photos of Dennis loading boxes into that beat-up Honda Civic, his face hollow and exhausted. The apartment he'd moved into was in a rough part of Tempe, the kind of place where the AC barely works, and the walls are thin enough to hear every argument from the neighbors. Studio apartment, $850 a month, furnished with second-hand furniture from thrift stores. Morris's report noted that Dennis had sold most of his possessions, the designer suits, the expensive watches, even his golf clubs. Everything that had once defined his successful image was gone. Tiffany, meanwhile, had moved back in with her parents in Scottsdale. Her Instagram account still existed, but the posts had changed dramatically. No more luxury brunches or designer handbags. Instead, she was posting inspirational quotes about finding yourself and starting over. Her follower count had dropped to 11,000 and was still falling. The influencer dream was over. In August, I received notification that the court judgment against Dennis had been finalized. The $85,000 debt, plus interest and legal fees, brought the total to $91,400. His wages from the retail store, where he was making roughly $36,000 a year, would be garnished at the maximum legal rate. After taxes and the garnishment, he'd be taking home maybe $1,800 a month, barely enough to survive, let alone thrive. Robert Greene called me after the judgment was entered. "Amos, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you satisfied with how this has turned out?" I thought about his question for a long time. Was I satisfied? Dennis had lost his job, his wife, his home, his reputation, and his financial stability. Everything he'd valued had been stripped away. Justice had been served in the most complete way possible. "Yes," I said finally, "I'm satisfied, not happy. This whole situation is too broken for happiness, but satisfied that he's facing real consequences for his actions. The garnishment will follow him for decades unless he wins the lottery or declares bankruptcy," Greene warned. "Bankruptcy wouldn't even discharge this debt. Family loans aren't usually covered. This will shadow him for the rest of his life." "Good," I said, and meant it. Maybe it'll remind him to be a better person. September brought an unexpected development. Barbara Richards, the nurse who'd witnessed Dennis's cruelty at the hospital, called me. We'd kept in touch occasionally. She'd become something like a friend through this whole ordeal. "Amos, I thought you should know. Your son came to the hospital today. He was asking for me specifically." My stomach tightened. What did he want? He wanted to apologize for how he'd spoken that day, for calling you those terrible names. He was crying, Amos. Not manipulative tears, real ones. He looked broken. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that apologies are meaningless without changed behavior. That saying sorry to me doesn't fix what he did to you." He nodded and left. "But Amos, I think he's starting to understand. I think losing everything has finally cracked through whatever wall he'd built around his conscience." After we hung up, I sat with that information for a long time. Part of me, the part that would always be his father, wanted to believe Barbara was right, that somewhere under all the greed and entitlement, the boy I'd raised still existed and was finally waking up. But I'd been fooled by hope before. I needed more than tears and apologies to strangers. I needed proof that the lesson had actually been learned. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the kind of clear desert skies that make Phoenix bearable again. My life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The company investment was performing exceptionally. Holmes had just announced a major contract that would increase our revenue by 30%. My equity stake was now worth over $620,000, a gain of $140,000 in just 7 months. The badge restoration project had grown beyond my expectations. My blog now had over 3,000 regular followers, and I'd been invited to speak at a fire service history conference in November. Other collectors were sending me their damaged badges to restore, and I was actually making a modest income from the work. Not that I needed it, but it felt good to be valued for my skills and knowledge rather than my bank account. I'd also started volunteering with the Arizona Firefighters Charitable Foundation, the organization that would inherit my estate. I helped review scholarship applications, visited injured firefighters in hospitals, attended memorial services for fallen heroes. It gave me purpose and reminded me why I'd chosen this career path in the first place. My life, at 68, was fuller and more meaningful than it had been in years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Losing my son had somehow freed me to actually live. Then late on an October afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Morris's surveillance had ended months ago. There was nothing left to investigate. Green only visited when we had business to discuss, and we'd wrapped up the last of the legal matters weeks ago. I approached the door cautiously, looked through the peephole. Dennis stood on my porch. He looked terrible. Thin, too thin, like he hadn't been eating properly. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of cheap button-down shirt sold at discount stores. His hair needed cutting. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but what struck me most was his posture. The arrogant set of his shoulders was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. I could have not answered, could have let him stand there and eventually leave. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I opened the door. "Dad!" His voice cracked on the word. Can we talk, please?" I studied him for a long moment, this stranger who wore my son's face. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked past me into the house he'd once planned to sell, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. The last time he'd been here was what, 3 years ago? Before Tiffany, before the greed had consumed him completely. I gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit." He sat, his hands folded in front of him, not meeting my eyes. I made coffee, not because I particularly wanted any, but because it gave me something to do with my hands, a reason to not look at him for a few minutes. When I finally sat down across from him, 2 mugs of black coffee between us, the silence stretched tight and uncomfortable. "I don't know where to start," he said finally. "Then don't," I said. "I don't need your explanations or excuses. I know exactly what happened and why." He flinched like I'd hit him. "I know you do. I know you hired a private investigator. I know you found out about Tiffany's plans, about the expense fraud, about everything. I know you know I'm a terrible person. I corrected, were a terrible person. What you are now is still being decided." His head came up, confusion and hope warring in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I took a sip of coffee, considering my words carefully. "You made choices, Dennis. Bad choices. Selfish choices. Choices that hurt people who loved you. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. The question is, are you going to let those consequences destroy you? Or are you going to let them teach you?" Dennis's face crumpled. Not the manipulative crying I'd seen from him before, when he wanted something. This was raw, genuine emotion breaking through. His shoulders shook, and tears streamed down his face unchecked. "I don't know how to come back from this," he said through the tears. "I've lost everything. My job, my wife, my home, my reputation. Every morning I wake up in that apartment and can barely afford to eat, and I think about what I had and what I threw away. I think about you lying in that hospital alone, and I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I was that person." "But you were that person," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. "You have to own that, Dennis. You can't move forward by pretending the past didn't happen." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand like a child. I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. Money doesn't mean anything. Status doesn't mean anything. The only things that matter are the people you love and how you treat them. I sat back, studying him. The anger I'd carried for so long had burned down to something cooler, clearer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like understanding. He'd had to lose everything to learn what I'd been trying to teach him his whole life. The lesson had cost him dearly, but maybe, just maybe, it had finally stuck. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "For work, I mean." "Assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Tempe. $36,000 a year. After the wage garnishment and taxes, I bring home about $1,800 a month. Rent is $850, utilities another $150. I'm living on rice and beans mostly, walking to work to save on gas." He said it without self-pity, just stating facts. "I applied for bankruptcy, but the lawyer said family loans don't qualify for discharge, so I'll be paying you back for the next 20 years, even with the garnishment." I nodded slowly. Then I stood up, walked to my office, and returned with a folder. I placed it on the table between us. Dennis looked at it, but didn't reach for it. "What is that?" "Open it." His hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside was a legal document, official and stamped. His eyes scanned the pages, confusion giving way to shock. "This is... You're canceling the debt?" "The garnishment ends immediately," I said. "The $91,400 you owe me is forgiven. Consider it paid in full. You'll get a letter from Robert Greene next week making it official." Dennis's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. He looked like I'd just told him the sun had stopped rising. "Why? After everything I did, why would you—" "Because the debt served its purpose," I interrupted. "It taught you that actions have consequences, that you can't just borrow money and never pay it back, that there's a cost to taking advantage of people. You've learned that lesson. Continuing the garnishment for 20 years wouldn't teach you anything new. It would just be punishment for punishment's sake." Fresh tears rolled down his face. "I don't deserve this." "No," I agreed. "You don't. But mercy isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they need to become better. You needed to lose everything to understand what really matters. Now you need a chance to rebuild yourself into someone worth being." I slid another document across the table. "This is an updated will, not the one leaving everything to the Firefighters Foundation. That one still exists. This is a different version to be executed only if certain conditions are met." Dennis picked it up with shaking hands, reading through it. His eyes widened. "Half the house? You're still leaving me half the house? If, and only if, you prove over the next few years that you've genuinely changed, that you're living with integrity, treating people with respect, contributing to society in meaningful ways. I've outlined the specific criteria with Green. Things like maintaining stable employment, volunteering in your community, building healthy relationships. If you meet those standards, you'll inherit half of this house when I die. The other half still goes to the foundation. And if I don't meet the standards, then everything goes to the foundation and you get nothing. This is your one chance, Dennis. Your only chance. Don't waste it." He set the document down carefully, like it might shatter. "I won't. I swear to you, Dad, I won't waste this." I held up a hand. "Don't swear to me. Don't make promises. Just live your life in a way that proves it. Actions, not words. That's all that matters from here on out." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing everything that had just happened. Finally, Dennis stood up. "I should go. I've taken enough of your time." "Dennis," he turned back, "you're welcome to visit. Not every week, not like before when you just wanted money, but occasionally. Maybe Sunday dinners if you'd like. No handouts, no loans, but family meals if you want." The hope that lit up his face was almost painful to see. "I'd like that. I'd really like that." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the 2 empty coffee mugs. Had I done the right thing? Forgiving the debt, offering him a conditional inheritance, opening the door to a relationship again? I didn't know. Maybe I'd just set myself up for another betrayal. Maybe Dennis would revert to his old ways once life got a little easier. Maybe this whole thing would blow up in my face. But maybe, just maybe, the son I'd raised was still in there somewhere, buried under years of greed and entitlement, finally digging his way back to the surface. Time would tell. I washed the coffee mugs, dried them, put them away. Then I walked to my workshop and settled into my familiar routine. The badge I was working on tonight was from 1952, brass and enamel, the Phoenix Fire Department emblem tarnished but still visible. I'd cleaned it carefully, replaced the pin, was now polishing it back to its original luster. As I worked, the desert sunset painted the sky outside my window in shades of orange and gold. Phoenix spread out below, the city I'd spent my life protecting, the place I'd built a career and raised a son and learned hard lessons about love and loss. The badge caught the light, gleaming like new despite its 73 years. Some things could be restored if you took the time and care. Some things were worth saving even when they seemed beyond repair. Whether Dennis was one of those things remained to be seen, but I'd given him the tools, the opportunity, and the motivation. What he did with them was up to him. As for me, I was finally at peace. My life was my own again, not built around managing Dennis's needs or enabling his greed, but focused on things that actually mattered. The company investment, the badge restoration, the volunteer work with the foundation, the possibility, however fragile, of rebuilding a relationship with my son based on mutual respect, rather than financial obligation. Justice hadn't come through revenge. It had come through boundaries, consequences, and the hard truth that sometimes love means letting people fail so they can learn to stand on their own. The sunset faded to twilight, and I turned on my workshop lamp, the warm glow illuminating the badge in my hands. Tomorrow, I'd start work on another one and another, each piece of history carefully preserved. Some things were worth the effort of restoration. Some things could be made whole again, given enough time and care. And some things, like the relationship between a father and son, required both people to do the work of rebuilding, one small step at a time. The story wasn't over, but for now, it was enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.